I still remember how nice it was watching everybody making videos, playing, discussing Breath of the Wild, partly because they still do, but it was just nice to have everybody on the same page about a Zelda game back in 2017, you know? I mean, there were still a few people sitting around going, it wasn't that good of a game, guys, but it's not one of the best-selling games on the Switch for no reason, right? I personally believe that it owes part of its success to the fact that they spent more time focusing on making the game actually good than telling everybody about how good it was going to be. Too many times now, AAA developers do the exact opposite, trying to fill everybody up on the promise of what a good game is supposed to be, and then dropping some disappointing, mediocre mess. And then came along this game that had everybody foaming at the mouths because Nintendo was just deciding to be super tight-lipped about it. Right up until the last few months when the game actually came out and showed everybody up, and people are still talking about it to this day. And wouldn't you know it, it looks like they're set to spin the block and pull a repeat in 2023, more than half a decade later. AAA games have been in a dire state for a while now, and I've certainly expressed disapproval with the practices that led up to more than a few flops over the last couple of years. So it's personally been a little hard to get excited for some of these games that have been coming out lately. Even so, I've been waiting with great anticipation over the last 4 years when Nintendo teased the sequel to Breath of the Wild coming out, complete with the reveal that we were getting the real Ganondorf back. None of that Calamity brand. And once again, they got everybody all excited and then just proceeded to not talk about the game right up until the last year of development when they finally announced the title, The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. Interesting name, right? Paired with the reveal that we weren't just re-exploring the same old Hyrule, but now we were going to be exploring its skies as well. It was all really exciting, right? And then it got delayed. See, Nintendo originally planned to release the game in March of 2022, but then decided to push it back an entire year to May 2023, despite the game already apparently being done. They just wanted to polish it up a little bit. Although we still knew very little about the game, and we definitely didn't know that fact until after the game dropped. But the whole not knowing anything changed in the months leading up to May 2023 when we finally got some extended looks at gameplay along with new powers and all that stuff. And then they topped it off with one final trailer before the game came out that finally gave us some hints at what the story was going to be, as well as a look at a rehydrated Ganondorf. And boy, were we starving for some actual news about the game, because that trailer was viewed more than 11 million times. And it was looking like happy birthday to me because the game was coming out a week before my birthday, so naturally I went ahead and treated myself to all of the merch for the game coming out. So, good job to me for not being biased about this game, I guess, right? Still, I managed to spend over 100 hours exploring the Kingdom of Hyrule playing the game before I decided I just have to talk about it. So even though I know that that sounds like light work to a lot of people who've been playing the game and making content about it, I still feel the need to say that this is probably going to be your only spoiler warning for the entire video, because even when I'm done talking about the story, there's just going to be so much that I'm showing that you might not want to see. So if you want to stick around for that, then cool, I appreciate you. But this entire video is going to be very spoiler heavy, and this is your only warning. If that's okay with you, then today I bring you my review for The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom.
Hey, yo, Giant, let's go!
It's been more than a few years since Link deleted Calamity Ganon and saved Princess Zelda along with the Kingdom of Hyrule. In that time, Zelda has reintegrated into society and spearheaded a rebuilding of the land and its many ruined landscapes. Things seemed to be going well until one day, a mysterious haze started spilling out of Hyrule Castle's lower levels that caused many people to fall ill, as well as any weapon that came into contact with it to rust and decay. Which felt kind of on the nose considering how it was living in New Jersey at the time that I was working on this video. Anywho, Zelda decides to investigate the castle with Link in tow, armed with the trusty Master Sword and new tools like the new and improved Sheikah Slate, named the Purapad, designed by everyone's favorite century-old kid scientist. They find a bunch of murals depicting the Imprisoning War, a conflict during the time of Hyrule's founding where an ancient race called the Zonai fought alongside Hylians to seal away someone known as the Demon King. The Demon King, huh? I wonder who that... Wait, is that a dead body? So this dried up husk attacks the two after this weird hand that seemed to be keeping it from waking up falls off, with Link jumping between it to save Zelda, leaving him to get Metroided by the mummy's grape jelly attack and the Master Sword gets shattered. Just then he calls out Link and Zelda's names alongside someone named Rauru before using the dark energy he was manifesting to lift Hyrule Castle straight out of the ground. The ground gives way and the mummy falls into the abyss below, and Zelda falls as well, but she was holding onto a strange stone that fell off of the hand when it activates and she just disappears, just as Link jumps in to grab her. But before you can and fall, he's saved by the hand and transported away from the scene. When he wakes up, he's greeted by his very own Devilbringer hand from Devil May Cry, as well as a voice in his head belonging to the owner of said hand telling him that he used it to replace his arm because it was beyond saving. Link grabs the broken Master Sword and leaves to find out that he's on an island in the sky before he finally meets the spirit of the hand, the previously mentioned Rauru. Who's he? Oh, just a member of the Zonai and the first king of Hyrule. I'm jumping ahead a bit, but you learn the brunt of this after being directed by Rauru to go through a sequence reminiscent of the beginning of Breath of the Wild. Once you go through these new shrines to gain these light of blessings that expunge the corruption from Link's body in order to restore the strength that was taken from him, you enter the Temple of Time to find a stone that gives Link a vision of Zelda before attaching itself to his new hand. It's then that Rauru gives you one last bit of advice and saying that you were exactly as Zelda told him before he fades away, just as King Rome did in Breath of the Wild. At the end of the temple, there's an altar where an orb of light appears and the Master Sword starts reacting to it. Link takes the cue and puts the Master Sword into it and it disappears. Just then a dragon splits the cloud and Link dives in the lake below to get back to the grounds of Hyrule. After landing, much like the previous game, you're free at this point to go about the game in any way you choose, but after this point the story is much more fleshed out than its predecessor. It's about here where the story splinters off in different branches that can all be handled at your leisure, if at all. When you make your way back to Hyrule Castle, you find a campsite called Lookout Landing where we reunite with Purah, who has aged up to an adult body just in time for all the horny posting on Twitter. And after Link fills her in on what happened at the castle, Purah informs you that after what is now being called the upheaval, strange things have started happening in the regions all across Hyrule, not the least of which has been chasms opening up across the land which lead to the depths, a new area which is basically a pitch black basement to Hyrule that you'll need to explore at different points. So Link travels across Hyrule above and below ground, meeting back up with many allies met throughout Breath of the Wild. We meet up with Tulin in the Rito village, Sidon in Zora's domain, Yunobo over in Goron City, and Riju within the walls of Gerudo Town. Each help you discover elemental temples in a manner similar to their last appearances, but they remain involved throughout the temples this time, and when you beat the bosses in each, which are all larger and more diverse than the Blight Ganons, you find these stones similar to the one Zelda found in the beginning, before being greeted by a spirit from the past. They identify themselves as sages who served King Rauru during the imprisoning war, and no matter which one you talk to, all these scenes play out the same way. They all do this thing where they all brag about how impressive their personal powers was, while also telling you that even with these secret stones given to them by Rauru to amplify said powers, it wasn't enough to beat the demon King Ganondorf, which led to Rauru sacrificing himself in a last-ditch effort to seal Ganondorf away. The sages then promised the Sage of Time that their descendants would awaken to their roles in time to help Link fight Ganondorf. So your interchangeable partner in these scenes accepts their role as the new sage of insert element here and bestow their power unto you. Then you reconvene at the nearby village and they all remark on how the Sage of Time looked exactly like Princess Zelda and wondering how is that possible. After all, they seem to recall seeing Zelda at some point after the upheaval, along with many people across the country spotting her at certain points, as well as this newspaper company, the Lucky Clover Gazette, and their main bird on the scene, Pen, hearing multiple reports, who by virtue of being a big bird who reports the news makes me think of well, aside from that questline, Impa has retired as chief of Kakariko Village, appointing her granddaughter Paya as chief, and begins traveling across the country to investigate these markings known as geoglyphs, which contain what's known as the Tears of the Dragon that show glimpses of what happened to Zelda. When she disappeared in the beginning, she was transported back in time where she met a then alive Rauru and his wife Sonia at the time of Hyrule's founding. So this is where you find out about Rauru being the first king of Hyrule alongside Sonia as the first queen. They take Zelda in, assuming her to be one of their descendants because she seems to exhibit powers of both light and time control, which are powers that Rauru and Sonia exhibit respectively. Zelda still had the secret stone she picked up, so even though she doesn't necessarily have control, it makes sense to them that it amplified her power enough to send her there. They discuss this with Raru's sister Mineru, who has her own guesses as to ways that Zelda can get back to the present when she informs Zelda that there's a forbidden use of the secret stones, whereby swallowing it, the user will become an immortal dragon. It's around this point that Ganondorf makes himself known in their time, making attempts at invading Hyrule only to be thwarted by Raru's power, leading to him swearing his loyalty to Rauru, despite him clearly not being keen to being ruled over by anyone, which Zelda is wary of despite Rauru claiming to be in control of the situation. And this part of the story has beats that evokes Ganondorf's introduction in Ocarina of Time to me. But soon after, he makes a power play where he kills Sonia and makes this face? steals her secret stone, and becomes the Demon King. And sometime after the point in the conflict where Rauru sacrifices himself, the Master Sword appears in front of Zelda. When you get around this point and have checked all the geoglyphs, the dragon from the beginning shows up and drops one more tear, and it shows one last vision to Link where Zelda recalls that earlier in the story, the Great Deku Tree explained that the Master Sword not only has the ability to heal itself, but to absorb sacred power in order to become even stronger, making it theoretically a sword of limitless power. She shares this info with an injured Mineru, who says that they don't have the time required to give enough power to the Master Sword, and this is where we see that Zelda's plan is to partake in the Secret Stone taboo and become a dragon in order to both live to the current day and feed her power to the Master Sword along the entire way. Relenting in the face of Zelda's conviction, she allows Zelda to go through with it. And with a final wish of hope for Link to succeed, Zelda becomes the Light Dragon. Back in the current day, the dragon is still nearby in the air, so you make your way onto her and retrieve the Master Sword after one last heartfelt message of Zelda's support. When you get back to Lookout Landing after clearing out the regional problems, awakening the sages, and retrieving the blade that gets top billing, Zelda gets spotted back at Hyrule Castle. But after getting dragged through this whole rigmarole throughout it, you find that it was actually Ganondorf channeling his Twilight Princess incarnation, using Zelda as a puppet to goad Link to the throne room, where he has to fight his shadow, Phantom Ganon, which would have been a better twist if I hadn't already fought him like 6 times before I got here, and if I hadn't played every other Zelda game. After defeating it and defending against Ganondorf with the help of the newly awakened sages, Mummy Ganon takes his leave. So you meet back up with Poro, who realizes that we're still missing one more sage. In search of the last sage, we end up back at Kakariko, where we end up on another quest line with the help of another new character, Toro, who's investigating the ruins. With his help, you find one last set of ruins in the sky, where you are then contacted by the spirit of Mineru after you find a piece to a machine. She leads you down into the depths where you find a construct factory, and following her instruction, you get to build your own Gundam. And then Mineru reveals that she's been inside your Porapad the entire time and transfers her soul into the mech. Turns out Zelda also brought the Porapad with her to the past, and Mineru transferred her soul into it before her body died off after fighting Ganondorf. This was a slight deviation from the way everything else played out, and I kind of appreciated it because I thought they were going to set up Toro to be the next sage, but that's cool. Anywho, with the last sage on the team, the key to our end goal is finding where exactly is the real Ganondorf. Well, coincidentally, I ran into Master Koga of the Yiga clan somewhere along my travels. That clan of banana-loving, goofball, evil Sheikah ninjas from the first game? Well, turns out that after Koga survived handing himself an L in Breath of the Wild, he was stuck in the depths, getting the Yiga clan back up and scheming after the upheaval. They've been scouring a bunch of materials out of some old mines in the depths to make a weapon to present to Ganondorf, before you stumbled upon them stumbling around in the dark. After thwarting Koga's attempts to steal resources and power from the mines, he confronts you with his own mech, before loudly and unnecessarily giving away that Ganondorf is in the depths below Hyrule Castle. I feel like I could have guessed that, but whatever. You beat Koga before he team rockets himself out of the picture, and you proceed to walk down the end of this winding, layered, time-travel-y road to face off with the Demon King himself. And so you go down into the depths one last time, through tons of opposition and one last bit of exploration into a part of the depths you hadn't yet seen, so far down that the light doesn't reach and that the gloom and darkness is blocking your sage powers. You find yourself going through the same corridors that you traversed in the start of the game, even clearing out the rocks that blocked some of the murals, which you can now see depict all of the events that Zelda went through in the past, which would have spoiled it if you saw it early on, but this is a clever callback to the beginning. And when you finally arrive at the doorstep of the final battle, Link is greeted with a wave of enemies, but then they're greeted by the sages, freshly arrived in person to assist you in the climax, all ready to fulfill the duty of their ancestors, and Mineru ready to finish the job that she couldn't previously. After fighting off the rabble, they give you the opening to challenge the Demon King without interruption. Link is now face to face with Ganondorf, who goes ahead and bathes in some Gatorade, and boy were those electrolytes doing some heavy lifting, because that man is moisturized now. The first phase is him basically feeling it out before doing the "this isn't my final form" thing, and then his health bar does that. This phase is tougher, but the sages arrive to even the odds. Even so, Ganondorf manages to knock them all out, making it a 1v1 again. Eventually though, Ganondorf realizes he possibly may not be him like he thought he was, and he does the Ganondorf thing where he goes all beastie in a last-ditch effort to end you. But this time, he takes a page from Zelda and eats his secret stone and becomes the Demon Dragon. You're joined by Dragon Zelda for this truly final clash in the sky, and after popping some pimples on Dragon Ganon's back, Link, just as he's done in many other incarnations, finishes him off with a well-placed sword to the forehead, shattering the secret stone and defeating the Demon King once and for all. In the immediate aftermath, Link's arm glows and transports the Light Dragon and himself to a realm where he's joined by Rauru and Sonia's ghosts, who take control of Link's arm and uses their light and time power together to miraculously revert Zelda back into her original form, and restoring Link's hand before taking their leave. Link awakens to see Zelda and himself are plummeting through the sky, so he rushes in to catch her, paralleling his failure to do so in the beginning before landing in a lake. He brings Zelda to land, where she wakes up unaware of everything that took place after she transformed, but realizing that Link saw everything through, and with a smile she declares that she's back. Normally this is where the story ends, but if you did everything related to the main story as I outlined, then you're met with a post-credits scene where Link, Zelda, the sages, and Purah go with Mineru to the Temple of Time, where she thanks everyone before joining Rauru and Sonia in the afterlife, but not before the sages vow to aid Zelda in protecting the kingdom, echoing the scene where the original sages did the same for Rauru. And with a heartfelt goodbye, Mineru disappears, and everyone looks out on the horizon to a new sun shining on the kingdom. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom has a story that feels more complete than its predecessor, in my opinion, given how the level of storytelling in it could often be charitably described as simple. Granted, this story is one that contains many familiar beats, referencing the other Zelda games like Ocarina of Time and Skyward Sword, to name a couple. It's so much more engaging. I personally walked into this with so many theories I had in my mind, and while it turned out to be much more straightforward than I was thinking in some ways, it was incredibly impactful nonetheless, and surprising in ways I hadn't expected, and it was worth playing through to see the tale to the end. I think the easiest way to start this section off is with a simple question. Did you like Breath of the Wild's formula and gameplay loop? Because if you did, awesome, this is easy. If you didn't, cool, this is still easy. What we have here is about 70 to 80% more of the same in terms of the structure. You can approach this game in any way you see fit. You can run straight to the castle and fight the final boss right away if it pleases the speedrunners, and you still use the same style of weapons, fight lots of the same kind of enemies, still break those weapons over said enemy's head, and still get the blood moon once in a while. The list goes on. But there's something fundamentally different. See, without the Sheikah Slate and its powers to assist Link on this journey, they decided to start him off fresh. When Rauru replaced your arm with his, he not only gave you a fresh set of digits, but a fresh set of abilities to go with it. The main one being Ultra Hand, which functions kind of like Magnesis from the previous game, but you can grab almost anything with this and move them or attach things to other things for all kinds of construction stuff. Paired with Zonai devices all over the land, or that you get from these capsules, which makes me disappointed in the Zonai personally, because finding out that they were big gacha fans almost makes me feel like they brought their destruction on themselves. But you can even create vehicles with these things. These range from simple cars, boats, and planes to all kind of different weapons. Hell, if you're creative enough, you can create a Batmobile or a Metal Gear. Then there's Fuse, which lets you combine items together to make new ones. This lets you combine monster parts with weapons to improve their capabilities, or even one weapon with another, which definitely gets more mileage out of the decayed weapons you find everywhere in the game. It also helps with extending the shelf life of weapons because you can help recover durability this way depending on what you do with them. You can also fuse things to shields for increased defense, or you can basically booby trap them with some items, like putting a ruby on a shield causing it to explode on contact. Then you can combine things to your arrowheads for all kinds of effects, from homing arrows to your tried and true elemental fare. Also bomb arrows with the returning bomb flowers, which you'll definitely want to stock up on. Rest in peace infinite bombs though. It's cool though. You can make rocket arrows now. Ascend is another super useful skill, which lets you phase through ceilings in order to climb to the top of any applicable structure, which can definitely save you a lot of time, because if you're like me, then you kept forgetting you had this skill and struggled in early game climbing things with that stamina bar. Recall is a really good one too. It basically rewinds items back in time, which can help you get some airtime to launch a glider without wheels or send attacks back at enemies. Lastly, a really good one that's apparently optional is the auto build, which remembers whatever abominations you put together previously and will put it together for you instantly. And if you're missing parts, then you can spend Zonite to create it on the spot to complete the builds. While I'm on that topic, Zonite is one of multiple currencies you have in this game now. Separate from rupees, Zonite is spent on refined crystals that you can use to improve your battery capacity for using Zonai devices. Aside from being useful for auto build, you want to get as much battery as possible so you can get as much out of the devices as possible. Damn it! The other currency here is Pose. Yeah, the ghosts you fight in every other Zelda game, they're money now.
It's a metaphor for capitalism.
You spend these at these creepy statues, either at Lookout Landing or in the depths, for rarer items including armor sets like the Darkling set. These are just more incentives to do your usual exploring when you're not joining up with Hylians to fight monsters monster strongholds or running up on Yiga bases in the depths. The depths are probably my favorite new thing in this game, to be honest. Diving into Hyrule's dank basement has you walking around in the dark looking for these light roots that eliminate the surrounding area and reveals all sorts of structures, hidden goodies, and oh shit! It's a pretty tough area, not just because of the enemies, but because of the gloom. This stuff isn't just on the higher ground of Hyrule Field, it's everywhere down here. Walking in this stuff actually disables your hearts, making them impossible to recover unless you either get above ground or under the light roots. And the enemies down here are just bathing in the stuff, meaning their attacks have the same effect, on top of the damage they're already doing. The depths are challenging on multiple fronts, but yield satisfaction in more than one way. See, exploring these has you running into warrior spirits that give you undecayed weapons, and you can find armor sets that used to be exclusive to amiibos. What do I need you guys for again? But one thing that's pretty cleverly done is that all the light roots are connected to shrines above ground, which is even more foreshadowed when you realize all the root names are the shrine names backwards. I didn't catch that until like 100 hours in, so it's just cool how this game still has surprises for me in the small ways that far in. And it's even crazier to me that Nintendo hid that much about the game just by focusing on teasing us about what's in the sky. This part is obviously reminiscent of Skyward Sword, what with all the islands serving as pit stops to rack up on Zonai devices and finding even more hidden equipment and even having some of the game's temples on top. Even the mazes from the first game are a 3-tier puzzle now, with parts of them being in all 3 levels of the map now. But just like Skyward Sword though, I do feel compelled to say that the sky is full of wasted potential, with the amount of the activities you can do paling in comparison to what's at the ground level and below. It honestly just, to me, feels entirely like a red herring to where the bulk of the game was focused. But the temples up there are fun too, at least. These feel like such an improvement to the mini dungeons that the Divine Beast served as in Breath of the Wild. The temples are multi-layered puzzle rooms that you can tackle in a number of ways, but all are the same in the old school Zelda way, that each temple has a certain puzzle gimmick that you use to eventually open up the chamber to the boss in order to stop each of the region's problems. And I found them pretty neat. You don't do a whole lot of fighting in a couple of these unless you're going out of your way to find it, and the boss fights are epic the first time around. Then I found out that somewhere along the way, these guys respawn in the depths, and I was just like, y'all gotta relax, man. At least there's no more guardians, because I hated minding my business just to... Oh. Yeah, these things are called Gloom Hands, which show up in all kinds of places you don't expect, and just like Guardians, you're usually better off avoiding these up until a certain point where you're significantly upgraded health and weapon-wise. Not only because they're hard, but because if you do beat them, Phantom Ganon spawns out of them, leading to another fight on top of the one you just had. And if you beat that, he'll drop a Demon King's Bow, among others, which has an attack stat based on how much health you have, so early on, not worth it. But by the time I found it, it was pushing 50 damage, and I've got a few of these things now. A side effect of how I ended up fighting Phantom Ganon like 6 times before I fought the real Ganondorf at the end is that I knew most of his patterns, because just like in Ocarina of Time, they have largely the same patterns aside from a few quirks near the end. I guess that's a bit of a tagline for the game as a whole. It's largely the same, but with a few different things added on top. I think the biggest strength of this game over Breath of the Wild is that there's far more room for creativity. Ultra Hand alone has potentially limitless use if you want to put the brain power to designing crazy stuff, or you could stick to what you know and you'll be having fun either way. And armor combinations with a good weapon can yield crazy results for damage. Essentially, if you think it in this Zelda game, you can probably do it. Even smaller additions, like there being a recipe system to catalog things you've made with food, does wonders for experimentation incentives by nature of you being able to redo crazy mixes that you would have otherwise forgot. Although I'm going to be honest and say that I do wish that they would have added some other quality of life changes, like say hotkeying outfit combinations, because there was still an abundance of constant pausing to change outfits. And also, cycling selections for arrowhead fusing can cause fight pacing to grind to a halt, even when sorting to the most used section, but ultimately these little things don't affect me too hard considering they add a few extra seconds to my now over 130-hour playtime. I was just burning time away, playing in this sandbox and loving it the whole way. As another example of building upon an already solid foundation, I feel as though Tears of the Kingdom makes much more impactful use of its aesthetic and use of music. Of course, Hyrule still looks as gorgeous as it did when we laid eyes on it in 2017, but when you go beyond that, this game can still blow you away with the scenery. The bright yellows combined with the sunrise is insanely beautiful, and looking down at all of Hyrule from up above is a striking view. But even then, you can just feel the mystery and tension when strolling in the dark of the depths. The pitch black abyss, only occasionally stifled by bright bloom scenes, exposes imposing grand structures set beside huge fungus and spores filling the air with the menacing glow of the gloom, and everything in between is just emblematic of the sheer scale. And it's really impressive when you think about how consistently it all runs, where it still mostly manages to exact the same frame rate. I mean, occasionally I had a couple of times where everything froze in place when I dove into the depths and the Switch was trying to hold it all together like Spider-Man when you got into the big group battles, but it's all relatively consistent. It's not perfect, but imagine how much happier Pokemon fans would have been if Scarlet and Violet was this consistent at launch. I guess that extra year wait was worth it. If only some publishers had that same kind of foresight, I wouldn't feel the need to keep using them as the recent examples. Musically, the game is just as atmospheric as what came before, but I think it really starts to shine when you're dabbling in the newer activities. For example, when you're launched out of one of the new viewpoints called Skyview Towers for the first time, there's a bit of a rush as you build up to being shot in the sky. And whenever you're getting airtime that way or diving off of a sky island, there's a simple rush in the piano number that plays as you just experience the airy feel of falling. And then when you descend a chasm into the depths, the blaring horn that accompanies the change in tone is so good, it never gets old. And I adore the way they use the music for the game's dungeons. Every dungeon has its own backing track that starts off softly, but as you get closer and closer to opening the boss room, it gets louder and reaches the kind of heights that largely were previously only reserved for the boss fight themselves and the final section of Breath of the Wild. It just oozes with confidence. Having more moments like this just add to how much more this game has going on for it in its overall presentation. And this also extends to the scenes and the voice acting within. There's a lot more scenes in this game, fully voice acted of course, minus Link doing that thing where he looks like he's constantly passive aggressively thinking about how Zelda took his house in Hateno Village and I had to make a new one over at Tarrytown and they made him build it himself. Even in the post-credit scene when everyone is pledging themselves to Zelda, he's literally just there staring off into the middle distance. I'm gonna need them to commit to the bit and give him a voice next time, seriously. Just don't make it, you know.
Well, excuse me.
But I appreciate how the sages banter all the way through the dungeons and during battle and such all the way up to the final fight. I still don't think it's the highest quality voice acting, but it's still more than effective than when there's nothing there. I'm just kind of blown away by how I can spend all the time I did on Breath of the Wild and still have felt like everything was hitting for the first time as if it was all brand new. It's not, but what we have is changed and built upon so smartly that it just eclipsed anything else I played this year. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom left me in awe for much of my time, and in the end, it left me with tears of my own. I'm honored to give this game my first Diamond tier rating. What a beautiful experience, flaws and all. It's no wonder that the game has been so successful, even though I personally still don't think it's anywhere near a perfect one. I mean, I had plenty of my own little gripes here and there, but as an experience, it left me far more satisfied than most things I've played recently. How about you though? I can keep going, but if you ended up watching this all the way to the end and want to share your thoughts on it, I would love to discuss, so maybe go ahead and leave a comment or like and subscribe along the way. I would appreciate that. In the meantime though, I'm kind of wiped out from all this time I've been putting in, so I'm gonna get ready to take a nap. Maybe we'll pick this up later when I come back. I'd like that. I'll talk to you later.